Welcome back, everyone, to BBB Sharing. I'm Evie, Director of Ignite, sparked by BBB. Today, I have Brittany Swigert. I almost said it. But very cool last name, but she also has a very cool job. She is here with Old Dominion Title and Escrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're probably thinking, that's not a cool job, but it is. So what do you guys do there?
So to think it's not a cool job, admittedly, is maybe kind of where you're looking. It's a lot of paperwork, and for most people, it's really boring. It involves a lot of research and a lot of detail-oriented actions. So for most people, it's very much just sort of your eyes glaze over. But for people like me, it's really exciting. So what we do is anytime that somebody's buying or selling real estate, it's up to us to make sure that we send somebody out to go and examine title. In some cases, that is also still me, but we do have other examiners that we work with as well. And then they'll go and they'll research the title. They'll pull any required documents or things like that. Anything affecting the property like deeds, easements, any liens, things like that. Anything that could really affect someone's enjoyment of their property or their legal right to own it. And then from there, it goes to be underwritten, where an underwriter, which for our company is me, will go through each document and they'll read everything and pull everything out for anything that could affect the property, how it affects the property. And then they will put all of that together in a document that they'll send to their closer, who then does everything that sort of pushes it forward to get to the table so that people can finally get their house, move in, and start their life. It's a huge, huge background process with so many different moving parts, which can make it a little bit exciting when certain things come up. But it's definitely a job that you kind of have to like to research and read. Otherwise, you're going to be miserable.
And I can only say that would be fun for me because I love reading and I love doing research.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what makes my job of what I do here fun, including
Right.
the podcast studio. But not to add to that, one of the things that you guys do get to do is occasionally something does happen, like a hiccup, or you're like, how did this even come across my desk?
Oh my God, I've had so many. I've had so many. So funny enough, I actually for years, like now I have Caitlin, who is amazing. She is my rock. She is my assistant, and I love her so much. She has brought so much into my world. I'm so happy about it. But before her, I did all of our title clearing. So in doing so, I've seen some weird things. There was one of my regular clients who was purchasing a property at foreclosure, and it was originally sitting on 2 parcels. Well, half of the house was sitting on this little tiny parcel, and the rest of the house was sitting on the larger parcel with the big yard. So when they got the loan, when they recorded everything in the legal description, they left out that little parcel. So they could only actually foreclose on a part of the house. So I'm sitting there looking at this. The only way to figure it out is to go and visit these people who don't realize that they still have land. And it's just that's one of those situations where there's just no way out. Like there's nothing that you can do. And then there were other ones where they have put loans on the wrong property that somebody owned because they own multiple pieces, and then they put the wrong legal description that we've had to work through. Thankfully, that one it took a couple of months going back and forth and arguing with their lender and getting everything. With title clearing, it definitely comes down to a lot of perseverance and tenacity, because even though somebody might be wrong, even though somebody may have messed up doing their job, it's really difficult to get them to do what they're supposed to do after the fact. So I remember fighting with one mortgage company, and I sent them so many different ways that the document could be done, even though it really only needed to be done one way. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want to have this, then you can put this note in here and it'll not do anything because it still means the same thing, but it's more clear for your people to feel more comfortable about it and things like that. And we just went back and forth. There was another situation where there was a will where they had left something to a particular person, but they weren't clear about it. They were like, my Ashland property. That's not helpful. Any properties in Ashland could or could not be this one. So at that point, since it wasn't clear, it would have gone to any of it for the rest and residue.
Yeah.
So then we had to track her down, and we had to get her to sign off and all of this and get the family back together. And it was just, that one was definitely some long nights and weekends. But in seeing all of that, you also get to experience so many different things with so many different people. Because at the end of the day, it's when the chips are down that people really show up for one another. And being able to see that, I think, is great. and being able to be there and be that person. Because if you're a seller and you've got a problem on a property that you're trying to sell, that you're relying on to sell for your livelihood, and all of a sudden, while cool and interesting to me because it's what I do for a living, it's devastating for them. And that's something that you really have to consider when you're working with these people, because you want to make them feel comfortable. And more than that, you want to take care of them. You want them to be able to go into that next step of their life in a place that they're comfortable with, in a place that they've been able to take care of the things that they needed to take care of. So even though it's something that I enjoy from a logical and sort of a strategic standpoint, nothing compares to the look of relief on someone's face when you're like, we got it. You know, we got that thing that we needed. We got your CS, or I got the release, or we were able to get them to sign that easement. So there's access. It's so rewarding when you run into that. And you see it all throughout what we do, not just when there's a problem. I had a client, this must have been a few months ago. And it was one of those where somebody comes in and reminds you what you do and why you do it. And she was a single mom. She was from not just herself, but even family history of these abusive relationships. And not that there is anything wrong with living in a trailer. I certainly would if I owned a trailer. But
especially if you can spruce it up and make
oh
it
my
look
God,
nice.
right? Oh, my assistant bought a manufactured home, and it is freaking gorgeous. It's so much nicer than my house. But that's not the point. But she always lived in these trailer parks and things like that. And then she was the first person in her family to own a house. And she was able to break out of this sort of, toxic cycle with her family and with her significant others and things like that to be able to build this life. And so at the end of the closing, she's sitting there crying, holding her kids because she's so happy and she's so proud that she could do that for them. And it's moments like those that make you really feel what you're doing. Because, like, at the end of the day, I don't make enough money to do what I do. It's all about the lives that we touch. So it's really rewarding when that stuff gets to happen.
That's amazing. I know you said your job is pretty boring and your eyes glaze over, but that sounds like a pretty awesome job to me.
So those moments are great. It's the long hours of reading through like covenants and restrictions where you're like, and no house within 60 feet with a fence of 8 inches and 3 feet, It's just... That's when
the
it's,
voice in your head
exactly.
starts becoming monotone.
Exactly. It's all of it's the drudgery of it. Because there's definitely some excitement, but there is a lot of drudgery in between. Of course, for me, it doesn't bother me. I research things for fun.
Which is a good thing because you seem like you're really good at what you do.
Thank you.
One of the things that I did want to touch base with you on, really correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a mortgage broker that was in here months ago, and she's from Arizona. And she said, I've never had to deal with lawyers for closing costs. She said it was always just the title company. Now, I don't know the laws here in Virginia. Do you have to have a lawyer for closing, or can you just go through the title company like Old Dominion?
So Virginia is not an attorney-only state. It was at one point, I do believe, but it's been a long time. There was some things that were occurring over the last few years that had people a little bit nervous, but it looks like we're, sort of going back on the right track. There's a lot of stuff where it needs to be. So we're still holding strong on that. But there are some states that you do have to use an attorney. And I think the biggest downfall of something like that is once you start making these requirements that an attorney is required, you end up running into situations where an attorney has decided that their service is worth a specific amount. And because they don't have the competition of the title companies, they're going to raise that amount to something that makes it really profitable, especially considering all the work that's involved. They need to make sure that they're covering their payroll. They need to make sure that they're covering their general spread, but they're also going to see the opportunity for a lot of people to make some money. And at the end of the day, while yes, that can be beneficial to the law firm, it's not always beneficial to the little guys who are scraping together everything that they have just to make ends meet on that closing. So I think being able to separate that is a good thing as long as the title companies do recognize the fact that they are not attorneys. There are certain things that somebody might ask me that whether I know the answer or not is irrelevant because there's something called an unauthorized practice of law. We have to make sure that we're not breaching that. And the way that I sort of balance that is I have a great relationship with several attorneys. So if somebody is asking these questions, I'll let them know, hey, this is how I see this as a, title underwriter. But if you need more legal clarification or if you have legal questions, I'm happy to set you up with one of my attorneys, and they'd be more than happy to go over any other details. So while we don't have an attorney on staff, we don't have one on hand, we do have one that we have a few that we have good relationships with should somebody ever need an attorney. But in most cases, your title company is going to be able to handle everything from start to finish, and they're usually going to be able to do it quite a bit under what an attorney is going to do.
Amazing. So what are some instances where an attorney would have to get involved?
So funny enough, with title clearing, that comes up here and there. If there's a situation that we can't resolve, whether it's somebody's refusing to sign something or if you've run into an unreleased deed of trust from 20 years ago and you just cannot find it, at that point, I'll usually take some time, see if there's any last thing that I can do, and then I will talk to them about going to an attorney. An attorney has different abilities because they can, file suits and things like that. I can't really get into what they would do, kind of like I couldn't with our clients, because that would be sort of breaching into that unauthorized practice of law. But there are avenues available, and there's advice that an attorney can give that I can't. And I'll know if it's a good candidate to send over there if it's something that I can't fix on my own, or if I know that there's a fix that I can't implement.
Awesome. So what has been kind of like a changing point in the industry for you guys that either like spiked business for you guys or kind of made a little bit of a downfall?
So honestly, I know it's kind of beating a dead horse, but COVID was a huge thing for the real estate market. Right at the beginning of COVID, once everything, really started to break, and then we ended up on the lockdowns and things like that. I don't know if people got tired of looking at their houses or looking at each other, but there were left and right things going. And then when the Fed dropped the interest rate down, there was so much demand to buy up all of this property. So, we were working, anywhere from 70 to 85-hour work weeks. And it was just insane. I remember getting up and starting work at 6:30 in the morning, and then I would go to bed somewhere around 2 or 3. Oof. And then I would get up and do it again. And I'd go home at night and cook for my son, and then I would go back to the office, or I would work from home all night just sitting at my kitchen table. It was so unbelievably busy. And then after that sort of went through, and then all of the prices went up, and then all of this, and then all of that. And now that we're seeing those rates going up, we're seeing business drop dramatically. The market right now is really, really tight. There's real estate agents struggling to pay their bills. There's title shops closing up. There's people reducing staff. It's not great in the market right now. I'm not going to pretend that it is.
Yeah. With the interest rates, reaching like to the levels that they're at. When I bought my house, I bought it during COVID.
Right.
And my interest rate was at 3%.
Yeah.
Which, amazing.
Unprecedented.
Right? And then all of a sudden, not even like a year or two later, it like skyrockets to 7.5, almost 8% in some mortgage companies. And I'm like, this is crazy.
And the funny thing about it is, though, if you look at the actual interest rates compared over the last 20 or so years, the interest rates that we had during COVID, while they were low, they were unprecedentedly low. So the interest rates that we have now really aren't terrible. They're terrible in comparison to what we had a few years ago. And I feel like with our short-sighted view of a lot of things, because we haven't experienced much, especially as the younger force sort of joins the home ownership, we are used to seeing certain trends within our lifetime, but we're not looking at the whole big picture of what it's been over the last 20, 30, 100 years or what have you. So when you look at that, the interest rates that we currently have really aren't that bad. We're just hoping for a return to unprecedented times. But in order for that to happen, there would probably have to be an unprecedented thing. So I think that we are going to see a reduction in volume for the housing market for quite some time. I think that as there's more confidence in the market back again, we're going to start to see that gradually build. And then over time, I'm hoping that it sort of rights itself. I don't think it's going to be quite as dramatic as it was at the start of COVID, because that was like somebody turned on a switch. All of a sudden, the levees burst, and it was just everywhere. I definitely was like, okay, so with all of this, I'm probably going to spend a lot of time working from home. We might have to cut back staff or hours. And it was the other way. I mean, I was just constantly at work. I was so burnt. We got so burnt out that I think Heather took a couple years off after that one.
Well, I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all by what you've said, because when I was buying my house like 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago now, 4 almost, it was the house was on the market for 2 weeks, and then we got it.
And honestly, that's a long time for a house to have been on the market during that time.
Hotcakes. It was crazy.
I mean, you could go look at a house one day and it would be gone by that afternoon. It was really hard to get there. Realtors kept having these signs that was like, I won the bidding war and things like that, because that's what was happening. I mean, everybody was fighting over these properties. And now, that's sort of petered out. And I'm also seeing a lot more properties with title issues. So things that were just kind of sitting around, I think people are starting to pull on as, things get tighter economically. They're trying to pull on what they have. And a lot of that includes assets that were left either just sort of sitting there because they didn't know what to do with them. We're seeing a lot of estate properties. We are starting to see a few foreclosures here and there, but, nothing that's at an alarming rate or anything like that. Few more refinances, and we are still getting some new construction, which is nice. I think new construction is always nice to see because, you're increasing the overall inventory of homes. So
I did hear something about how the new construction, we are actually negative what we should be every single year. We are not even at an equilibrium.
Right. And it's creating an imbalance in supply versus demand. And then with the interest rates, it makes it even more tricky. So prices go up, high interest rates, it's going to lead to decreased spending. Whereas if you had a larger variety to choose from, the prices might not be quite as high, and so that higher interest rate won't feel as hard. It's a very big difference between 7.8% on a $200,000 house versus a $75,000 house or a $450,000 house. The gap is absolutely astronomically different depending on where you're looking at. So having that inventory would be fantastic, especially for anyone looking for a home right now. But
same. I just sold my house, so
so it's just it does make things a little bit easier when there's more to choose from, because at that point the supply is higher, so the demand is more balanced out. And I think that's what we really need, is sort of a rebalancing of things. I talked to my son about it because he is weirdly into economics for a 13-year-old, and
that's amazing.
He wants to be an economics advisor for the FDA when he grows up. He's got very specific dreams.
Your kid's awesome.
He is. He's amazing. I love him. But he and I were talking about it, and he was like, "Well, what do you think would happen, if it crashed?" And I was like, "No, that'd be terrible. I wouldn't have a job. Your grandma wouldn't have a job. Your great grandma wouldn't have a job. No crash." What we need is a rebalancing. And I explained to him that you can't just sort of reset every time something goes bad. You have to be able to sort of work with what you have, and then try to get it back to a place where it's good. And in order to do that, we are going to need to see more inventory freed up. We are going to need to see the interest rates a little bit more flexible, and the purchasers a little bit more flexible on interest rates. But in order to do that, it has to fit within their budget. In order for it to fit within their budget, it has to meet.
Use the word rebalance.
Oh yes, absolutely. But in order for it to fit within their budget, you have to make sure that their monthly payment isn't going to be too much. Their escrows aren't going to put them over what they can afford. You're going to have to make sure of all of these things, which is what our loan officers are trying to do. But at the end of the day, there's only so much money.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to get that piece, especially right now with the way that the economy is. So I know a lot of people are hoping to see a change in that over the next several years. And I know that I am very hopeful to see something. But at the end of the day, all I can do is make sure that we take care of our people and the people in our community. And as long as we're doing that, no matter what happens, I feel like we're going to be okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you've got the hand of your neighbor and you have a hand for them, eventually the two of you can put something together.
I completely agree. And that's why I like the way you use the term rebalancing, because if the market, everyone says all the time, well, the market needs to crash. The market needs to crash. No, it doesn't. You need somebody that can pinpoint where the pain points are and say, okay, so we need to fix this area and we need to fix that area so that everything else can kind of balance out. because all a domino effect.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how much is tied up in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really easy to see like the TikToks and the Instagrams and the Facebook reels talking about, oh, it needs to do this, it needs to do this, from somebody who studied economics for a year and a half in college, and they have really good stage presence.
I can't tell you how many times I've had to explain to people in here that, okay, YouTube is not your financial advisor.
No. Like, talk to a certified professional. Don't get me wrong. They're great. They're charismatic, and sometimes they have great information. And then sometimes they're just wrong.
Yeah.
I saw one about wholesalers, which is where somebody will purchase a contract, they'll put in a contract and then they'll sell that contract to somebody. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, the way that you have that set up is literally
Recipe
just
for disaster.
I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Like, ask an attorney, but I'm pretty sure what you're doing there is illegal. There's ways to do it and it be right. I think in July or something, you have to have a license for it. July of this past year.
Oh, really?
2024. So there have been some changes and some reforms to make that a little bit more protected, considering it was like the Wild West. And we don't mess with them because they're always an issue for me. Like they either don't close or there's a problem, or it's like they're cursed. We got to the point where we're like, okay, if you absolutely have to do it, and it's one of our regular people, you're paying for the search even if it doesn't close, because these things are, I think I've closed one of maybe 6 that have come across my desk.
Really?
So they're a nightmare to deal with. So being able to put some things in place, I think a lot of people see real estate as this cash cow, as opposed to something that needs to be nurtured. And considering the fact that our economic system is built on the backs of the banks and the real estate system, like it's the skeleton of our I cannot talk. The skeleton of our economic foundation is the housing market. So for that to crash, people don't realize that is not just going to crash the housing market. That's going to cause issues for the banks. It's going to cause issues for the grocery store. It's going to cause issues for their video games, their shopping, their phones, like everything. It's wrapped up in, it's so deeply entrenched in our way of life here that it's wanted to crash, I think, is insane.
Makes your skin crawl, doesn't
but
it?
But they don't think about what the repercussions of that are. And in order for us to see a rebalancing, it's not something that any policy is going to do. It's not something that the government's going to be able to do for us. It's something that us as consumers have to get together and do ourselves. And the reason for that is because the only way that an economic system works is for it to be used properly. And the issue is that there are too many people exploiting it. And then that leaves the people who really need the services that you can find within it. The affordable homes. It's so hard to find an affordable home because they always get snatched up from these big mega corporations.
And
that
so
causes
glad you brought that up.
Such a big imbalance for a local sort of ecosystem of economics. And it's a little bit frustrating to see that, because I see families who struggle to get their house when I see a company that can just swan in and write a check.
Yeah.
And while that's fantastic that they can, build their company, and I would not want to stand in the way of that, I think us as consumers need to recognize the companies that are doing that and dissuade them through exactly what capitalism is. You choose how you're spending your dollars.
Yeah.
So if you're putting your dollars into these companies that are doing this and destroying your local communities, then you're just as complacent with it. In order to do that, you need to do what you can to shop for whatever you're looking for in a locally owned business. There are so many businesses just in Colonial Heights that you can get almost anything you need. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't go to Walmart, because I go to Walmart. I shop on Amazon. My fiance works at Amazon. I'm not anti-Amazon. Let's be real here.
Neither am I.
But I'm also pretty pleased when I can go into like Regenesis Thrift on the corner with Pickwick. I've got a shop over there, but I go into Regenesis at least once a week, and I'm usually picking up something that I find there. Or, I'll go and I'll pick up something from another local shop. And then we've got a bunch of people who do, roofing, or they do kitchen remodels, or all sorts of things. There's so many different options for so many different products and services from local and community-based companies. And I think it's so easy to forget that when we quickly get on Google and search, all right, who can mow my grass? Okay, there's this company, yeah, whatever. Whereas, you might get okay service from something that's got chains all across the area, whereas you might have a guy living 3 doors down who uses that business to pay for his kids' band lessons and things like that.
And the best part is, like, you're an accredited business. You're on BBB.org. We tell people to go to BBB.org because being an accredited business means that you are part of a marketplace that starts with trust, but you're also local.
Exactly.
So it helps people shop local, and that's what we want people to do. We not just shop local, but shop safe.
Exactly.
You know?
So you want to make sure that you're protected, and it's not somebody who's just trying to make a quick buck, or there's so many people now that with the way that things are, it's really easy to slip into the I want mentality. And when you do that, it opens you up to more nefarious earning potentials. And what I mean by that is that will give you sort of the push that you would need in some cases to feel okay with, scamming or doing whatever you can to just sort of flip that quick buck, even if it's not something that's bringing any value to yourself or your community. I see it all the time in all sorts of different places. In fact, my fiance almost got scammed from a fake Dominion power, but
Really?
Luckily he didn't. Thankfully he called them. Exactly. But and I see so many. Like I get so many emails and things like that I'm looking at. And I'm like, okay. I mean, you're getting better, but this is still obvious.
Yeah.
But they are getting good.
They're getting
really good.
We had a recent scam that was it with Wells Fargo, I think.
That checks out.
Yeah, they had a recent scam with where it was actually the scammer was sending a letter from Wells Fargo and I think a couple other banks, and don't remember their names, but they would send an actual picture of someone's house and say, we know where you live. Like, we know that you've been doing this online and spending money on this, and your account's at a negative balance. You need to pay us so-and-so. And so they'd run to the bank to get the money out and then, like, buy Bitcoin and stuff like that to help balance out an account that doesn't exist.
Right.
And I'm like, why would somebody fall for that? But then when you think about it, you're like, okay, if somebody sent me a picture of my house and then you were where I lived, I'd kind of freak out a little bit too.
Absolutely. And the big thing that I think they rely on is that fear and that sense of urgency. Because they usually will give you, okay, well, you have 24 hours to correct this, or such and such bad thing will happen. So at that point, you sort of go into survival mode. You're like, okay, what do I need to do to get this to go away? If you don't look at it immediately, go, that's not real. But if it catches you off guard, especially if you are in a sort of stressful situation already, and as things are with the economy, there's a lot of people who are already stressed about money. They're already trying to figure out how they're making their ends meet. They want to get to the grocery store and buy these things, but they also have to make sure they have gas in their car. So they're sort of making choices on what their family really needs, and then they get this call out of nowhere, and it's a threat to their well-being at that point, because they're either turning off your power or they're releasing information that could be damaging to your career or your reputation, or they're going to be cutting off your gas before things get
things
cold,
that would naturally scare you.
Exactly. So they pry on that in order to be able to manipulate people into giving them that money without thinking about the fact of, wait, why does Dominion Energy need Google Play gift cards? That doesn't make any sense. To me, because I analyze everything, especially with what I do for a living. It's kind of my job, but I analyze everything. So I'm like, no, that makes no sense. But for somebody who's in that moment of panic, it's so easy for them to be like, okay, yes, if this is going to take care of it, then this is what I'm going to do. I can't use this, this account because it's been compromised. So I have to go and do it this way. And that's sort of the sort of things that they tell them. They tell them pretty much anything they need to in order to get them to sort of come over to their side. And then there are other things that you'll see that kind of take advantage of that. One thing that I saw that's sort of related to what I do is a company called Title Lock, where they do they talk about title fraud or title theft. There's tons of commercials, and I get a lot of calls about it. So I did a lot of research on them. I even called them and talked to them a little bit as a potential, And so I asked them what they do. Apparently, they run through the MLS, which is the listing system for properties being sold. And then they will also check the local records. But if they do find that something's occurred that they believe is fraudulent, they will file an affidavit on your behalf, and that's about it. That's not a solution.
Oh, my God. An affidavit does basically nothing.
Yes, I mean, it states that they believe that there's fraud, but at the end of the day, they're not in court fighting. They're not providing any real legitimate proof or anything like that. I was like, well, do you go to court on our behalf? Is there something? Is there extra fees involved after that? And they're like, oh, we filed the affidavit. But what does that do? It doesn't do anything. So I ended up, and it's funny, and I should probably have asked a little bit more in detail because this was a few years ago, and I was trying to figure it out, and I couldn't figure out if our policies covered for it, and I had explained it poorly to someone as far as what I was asking. So I had an idea in my head that we were going to offer this new product, and I put this whole presentation together. It's really embarrassing, but I put through this whole presentation. It was like a slideshow. I narrated it. I put music behind it. It was awesome for a product we already offer. Because that sort of thing you're protected for with your owner's insurance for title insurance.
Oh my goodness!
So I did all this
reminding all of you guys that we had that. You should have been like, I was just reminding you guys that we already had that in a fun way.
My Chicago rep emailed me back. She's like, this is great, but we do that already. And of course, I went back and I read through all of the, restrictions and all of the, different things. And I'm like, oh, yeah,
You're probably like,
we do that.
Probably should have read that ahead of time.
Yeah. So that was fairly early days, and I was very excited to try to innovate, and
Well, you had
at this point,
you had the energy behind
exactly.
it. And that's the whole
and now
point.
I'm tired. I'm good. Like if you ask me to do something, I'm definitely gonna do it. But I'm not coming up with new product ideas for insurance.
Well, even if you
it
don't
ain't
come
broke,
up with
don't fix
right?
it.
How can people get in contact with you guys?
So you can contact me via phone or email. Phone is 804-526-8000. Email is brittSwigert@odtco.com, like Old Dominion Title Co.com. So you can do it that way. I also have a fax number. It's an e-fax, so you have to dial the 1, but it's 804-251-1586. I almost gave out my cell phone number. Although to be fair, I'd put it on my cards, so it's not like it's private or anything. So.
Brittany, thank you so much for coming in to talk to me. I had a great time talking to you.
I'm glad I did too. Thank you for having me.
This was
a pleasure. It was.
And
I hope I didn't go off the rails.
Oh, no. It was perfect, amazing. You had great information. You talked wonderfully about what you do and how much you love what you do, which I think is the main thing of why people listen to this. And the people that are watching on YouTube, please make sure to follow us on BBB, serving BBB Central VA on YouTube channel. And make sure to follow us, subscribe, like us, and comment down below really helps us out. And if you're listening on Spotify, it's BBB Sharing. Give us a follow and share the podcast out. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.